section of chapter 2 of your book, which is the internet, digital media, and media convergence. So this section is going to be about the development of the internet. So we'll start off by talking a little bit about context. The emergence of the internet as a mass medium, which has allowed all kinds of media to kind of converge into one space and be easily shared, has led to what's often called the digital turn. So rather than having separate analog media, we're now kind of collecting all of those different media in one place online. And that's led to this very rapid convergence of lots of different media. Your book discusses FOMO, fear of missing out, and that's something that I'm sure as Generation Z, you guys are well aware of, and it's taken a really interesting, I suppose is one way to put it, turn during this kind of COVID time, where we've got what we post on the internet becomes almost a persona of ourselves rather than our true selves. And so by sharing such select snippets of our lives, we curate this personality. And when we see other people's curated version of themselves, we get this anxiety around what other people are doing that we haven't done. So while we're presenting this happiness, we're presenting this perfect version of ourselves, it's actually overall led to unhappiness across the board because we're all concerned about this presentation. And we want to do things that will look good within the curation. And in COVID times, it's actually led to, well, if I'm stuck inside, I want to be out doing these things, or the reverse, why are you out there doing those things? You should be inside protecting other people. So it's almost become, had a bit of a backlash in the past few months. So there have been numerous studies done to see, what is the emotional effect of social media. And you will, I'm sure, have seen people trying to kind of break that cycle of curation and posting, no, this is what real life looks like. For me to look like that, it takes hours. For every lovely photograph you see, there's, 20 hours of me not being so rosy and happy. Because there is this assumption that what we see is real, and it's just an aspect of that reality. Now, in chapter 1, one of the things that I highlighted and that I wanted you to make sure that you understood were these steps in any kind of media innovation. And in almost all the chapters, we're gonna walk through how that particular medium has gone through these steps. So again, just as a reminder, the steps are emergence, where you have that original problem that someone has solved. Entrepreneurial, how can you monetize this? How can you find a way to get people to buy in, literally? Then if they succeed there, it becomes a mass medium, it goes out to everyone else. And then convergence is when it's become so successful, it has no longer become disruptive, and now we have older media becoming part of the new media. So for the internet, the emergent stage, again, this is when you have a problem and someone comes up with a technological solution to solve it. So back in the 1960s, we're in the middle of the Cold War. We're concerned about the ability for a foreign entity to come in and shut down communication within the military when we need it most. So that's where it started. So the internet started off as ARPANET. It allows one-to-many communication as well as two-way communication. Now, to see how much it's changed, even in the last 20 years, so obviously the 1960s to 2000, 40 years, we went from a few people around the US being connected to, in 2000, about 50% of Americans were connected to the internet, and now, 20 years on, about 90% of America is on the internet. So it has, in fact, gone from the emergent stage where there was a problem of we want to make sure we have a network that no one can shut down, so that we can make sure that we get emergency communication to everyone, to being well past a mass medium that almost everyone uses. It's ubiquitous. Now, when I'm talking about the fact that there was that concern about someone being able to shut us down, this image kind of shows you the difference between the different network types. So when we started off, you would have the centralized network where one person would have the information and they could send that information out. But if you took down that central node, no one else would be able to get information. And so it was very vulnerable to, you've got to remember that the fear during the Cold War was that, someone was going to drop a nuclear bomb. And if you hit the right person, that's it, you could take down the entire country. So the next best solution is decentralized networks. And if you have a decentralized network, you have multiple nodes, as you can kind of see here in the middle. It's almost like a root system, kind of going out from these little areas. So it's harder to take down, but you still could. Whereas the internet is what's called a distributed network. Every node can connect to every other node. There's no way to take this down. And believe me, people have tried, but you cannot actually shut it down because there's always another avenue for the data to travel. And so it's interesting in that it started out as a way to make sure that the US military wouldn't be cut off from information and be able to react quickly to a change. And now we have things like the Arab Spring uprising, where people are using this distributed network in order to take down a military organization. So in the internet, each computer has a similar status and power. Nobody can own the system outright. No one has the power to take the system down, no matter how hard they tried. And again, in Arab Spring, they did try, but no one has been successful. And it wasn't just the network between the computers that went through this emergent stage. Email started about 11 years after the internet started, because, again, at this point, we haven't even hit the point where we're trying to make money off of it. We're still using it by government agencies, by nonprofits like universities. So it's very much only being used by researchers. But they want to be able to share information in a two-way exchange. So they want to be able to post information, and that's what the internet is good for. But this two-way communication back and forth is when we decided to use email, where basically you get a name, you get an identifier, and I can send something directly to you versus just post the information anywhere on the internet. So we've got stuff coming around for about 10 years now. It's been about a decade. We're in this emergent stage. We're still trying to figure out what it does and what it's for. But now people are starting to see, especially as it's being used in universities, you've got people realizing that if you could get this out into people's homes, then we're going to be able to make money off of it. But the biggest problem is the getting it into their homes. Up until the 1970s, computers took up a whole room. You couldn't really market something that you would need not just, a desktop, not just an area of a room, but that you would need a whole room to house the processing power. Not much you're going to be able to do with it either at that point. In the 1970s, we get microprocessors, and now we can actually make computers that fit inside people's homes comfortably. They're still expensive, but it's something that you can aspire to having in your home. And so remembering that the entrepreneurial stage is getting it into the hands of consumers. So consumers aren't going to want something that's huge and unwieldy, never mind expensive. They'll buy something expensive if they can see why it's worthwhile and if it's something to aspire to in terms of a lifestyle. So this is going to signal that we can market computers, and if we can market computers, we can market that interconnectivity between computers. Now, at this point, the interconnectivity is still a bit of an issue in the 70s because dial-up is very slow. You only really have major cables being run between, again, military installations and large universities, large research universities. So the National Science Foundation actually starts the push for laying down fiber optic cable. So, you guys probably don't remember dial-up. That was primarily how I got on the internet when I was in my younger days through teens. And if I wanted to be able to use fiber optic cable, I went to my mom's college because she's also a college professor. And so then if I wanted to download my music from Napster, I would go into work with her so that I could use that instead of it taking, I'm not kidding when I would say it could take hours to download an album off of the internet. So this was not high quality sound files either. So as we're starting to get the fact that we can make the cables cheaper, we can start laying more cable. And then, so in the 80s, as much as we're starting to lay more cable around the country, it's still not common in people's homes. It doesn't become common in people's homes to have high-speed internet access until really the 2000s, late 90s into the 2000s. So when we're talking about the internet, we are talking mostly about the World Wide Web. So remembering that, again, this is about posting rather than two-way. And again, as we start to become a mass medium, we need to standardize things. So we've managed to get computers small enough to fit into our homes. They're cheap enough that most people are able to buy them. We're starting to get connectivity to be cheap enough for people to afford and fast enough that people don't think it's so much of a pain they're not going to do it. But if we're communicating back and forth between all these computers, we need to have a standard language to use. So HTML, in case you're wondering, stands for Hypertext Markup Language. That is the language that becomes the standard. And even to this day, that's the standard that web pages are written in. That's why it says .htm at the end or .html. Often you don't see the extension anymore. That's also why it says HTTP/HTTPS, either one, which stands for a Hypertext Transfer Protocol. You don't need to know what that stands for. I'm just letting you know. But the hypertext is the language. And so it's the hypertext media language markup language, and that is transferred via the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So we're able to finally get to a point where we've got a single language that everybody's using, and we're able to get into people's homes so we can make money, and it's becoming big enough to be worldwide. Wasn't very user-friendly. That's the other problem. So again, people are trying to make money off of it, so they want it to be user-friendly. They want people to want to use it, so that's when we get browsers such as Netscape. Netscape is the kind of progenitor of Firefox. We have, obviously now we have Google Chrome, but that wasn't until after Google came in. Internet Explorer came out a little bit after Netscape, and Netscape was the first one. So you'll notice that isn't until 1993. Before 1993, you kind of had to be a little bit of a coder and a little bit of a geek to get onto the internet and to be able to send messages back and forth. I've never heard people talking about Usenet and things like that. But in the 90s, we're becoming a mass medium, becoming a point where you don't have to have a computer science degree in order to get online and to browse pages and to get information. Everyone and their mothers are online. Now, there is one way to control access, and that is how you actually get your computer onto the network. So that's where our internet service providers come in. And we still have internet service providers kind of acting as gatekeepers to access to this day. Nowadays, we've got Verizon Fios, we've got Comcast, we've got Spectrum, we've got the Dish networks with the satellite uplinks. So those are our current internet service providers. In the 80s and 90s, we had AOL. Everyone had those lovely CDs that became good coasters for you. You can still buy them on eBay, by the way. People will still sell you AOL CDs and AOL floppy disks. Even better. And Prodigy was another one. Now, you'll see their names come up probably at some point when you're talking about media law, because these guys become where you have proving cases that set precedent for constitutional law going down the line. But those were our big dial-up service providers. So I had an AOL account in the 90s, and we had phone cable that would run all over our house to connect from where our phone jack was to the computer. Then we get into DSL, which is an improvement on dial-up, but it still uses phone wires. Now, DSL you still get a lot of throughout Europe. I had DSL in most of my flats in Europe, because an issue for all of these becomes infrastructure, becomes the actual laying of cable. And so all of these companies, all these internet service providers are going to have to pay to lay cable. They might be the phone company. This is why phone companies are really big as internet service providers. They've already going to have to put down phone wires, so they might as well use the phone wires for other things as well. So DSL uses copper phone wires, and so it can actually transmit information quicker, but it's still phone wires. When we get to broadband cable and we get to fiber optic, they're going to have to spend millions of dollars to lay these cables all across the US, all across the world. And that's where we're going to see, when we talk about freedom, competition becomes an issue. Because why are you going to compete for the same customer? Why are you going to spend so much money to lay cable down when you're competing for the same person? So two companies would lay cable down to get to one house, and you're only going to use one of them. Why would you spend that money? So companies are going to divvy up places, and there's not going to be competition, and that's going to be a problem, because that's going to drive prices up. So in the 1990s, this was called the last mile. So when I started college, it was the year 2000. I grew up in Framingham, and I went to my first semester of college at Mount Holyoke, right around the corner from us. And I would drive down the Mass Pike when I'd go home for the weekends to visit my family. And at that point, they were laying cable between Boston and Western Mass. And so the median strip of the Mass Pike was ripped up to lay down broadband cable lines. Because at that point, there were no broadband cable lines out in Western Massachusetts. Everyone was on dial-up and DSL. And it wasn't until after that it became available to people on non-commercial basis. Obviously, the 5 colleges, the big colleges in Springfield, they all had their own, but it wasn't available to consumers. So the issue was, okay, we get it down the pike, who's going to pay to get it from the pike to someone's house? And so companies are going to decide whether or not they're going to spend that money. So now it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere, and we're going to hit convergence. So now we have internet in everybody's home and everybody's pocket nowadays. Obviously not so much in the 90s or early 2000s, but now, we all have our smartphones. And so now we're able to reproduce all of the old media that we used to bother going and get, and we have it on the internet. I walked through Target today, and my husband and I marveled at the fact that they're still selling physical CDs in Target. Why would you do that? So now we're taking all of our old media and putting it onto the internet in order to then, again, make money off of it. So that's us walking through the stages from emergence. So emergence is where there's a need. The U.S. military wants to make sure that it can't have its communication taken down. Research labs want to be able to communicate back and forth via email. Someone decides how to make money off of it. They realize, okay, if we lay down cable, we can get into people's homes, but it had to start off with being computers in people's homes. So you had microprocessors make computers small enough. Then you're able to get dial-up internet, and so people can start connecting with each other, so we can start making money. And as we get better connectivity, as we get to DSL, and then we finally get on to cable and fiber optic, everybody has the internet available to them pretty much 24/7, and all of the different media converge into the internet.